The Germans believed they had finally made their U-boats impossible to hunt. They had built a torpedo unlike anything the Allies had faced before. It didn't chase ships, it chased the hunters. Every escort captain in the Atlantic knew what that meant. The closer they got to a U-boat, the closer they came to their own death. For Germany, it was supposed to change the war. Instead, it triggered one of the most devastating submarine disasters in Kriegsmarine history. In just 19 days, 6 U-boats vanished. Not over a whole campaign, 19 days. And the strangest part wasn't how they were destroyed. It was who destroyed them. Not Britain's newest warship. Not a secret weapon. Not overwhelming air power. The man responsible had nearly been forced into retirement before the war reached its darkest hour. But before we uncover how 6 submarines disappeared, how did Britain's hunters survive a weapon built specifically to kill them? The answer begins on a freezing winter night, with a sound so faint almost everyone aboard would have ignored it. January 31st, 1944, southwest of Ireland. The Atlantic was almost black. Towering swells rolled beneath HMS Wild Goose as the escort sloop cut through icy water at 15 knots. Nobody spoke more than necessary. Nearly 300 feet below, another crew lived inside complete darkness. 44 German submariners sat shoulder to shoulder inside U-592, a Type Vic commanded by Captain Lieutenant Karl Jaschke. Every man aboard believed they had the advantage. Germany's new not-acoustic torpedo had restored confidence throughout the fleet. It didn't need to see its target. It listened. The louder an escort's propellers became, the more certain its death. Then, far above, a British sonar operator froze. A tiny metallic echo returned through his headset, weak, easy to dismiss. Most commanders would have logged it and moved on. But the officer commanding this hunting group had spent 20 years preparing for exactly this moment. He didn't charge. He didn't panic. He simply looked toward the dark Atlantic and quietly began a hunt that would leave Germany asking one impossible question for the rest of the war. If our submarines were finally safe, who kept sinking them? Before we follow Walker's hunt, understand what Germany believed had happened, because if they were right, those 6 submarines should never have been sunk. By spring 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had become the war that decided every other war. No tanks could reach Europe, no bombers could fly from Britain, no invasion of France could happen unless merchant ships survived the Atlantic first, and somewhere beneath those gray waves, Karl Nitz's wolf packs were waiting. To a young American sailor making his first crossing, the Atlantic felt like a graveyard. Every sunset brought the same fear. Would the Convoys still exist by morning? Many never found out. One merchant seaman later remembered an explosion in the darkness, then watching a cargo ship vanish so quickly that only burning oil marked where it had been. No distress call, no survivors, just silence. For nearly 4 years, Germany's submarines had hunted with frightening success. In the war's opening years alone, U-boats sent more than 400. 0 tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. Britain wasn't just losing ships, it was running out of food, fuel, and time. Then came the month German submariners would never forget, May 1943, later called Black May. Radar suddenly found submarines in darkness. Long-range aircraft appeared over waters once considered safe. Escort groups stopped merely protecting convoys, now they hunted. 41 U-boats disappeared in a single month, nearly a quarter of Germany's operational force. Even Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, architect of the U-boat campaign, withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic and later admitted Germany had lost the battle. For almost any commander, that would have been the end. But Dönitz bet everything on one new weapon, a torpedo that could hear. A torpedo that hunted the hunters. What Nitz didn't know was that inside the Royal Navy, one forgotten officer had already begun inventing a way to make that weapon almost useless, before Germany even fired it. Ironically, the man who would destroy Germany's greatest hope had almost disappeared before the war began. If the Admiralty had gotten its way, Captain Johnny Walker wouldn't have been hunting submarines in 1944. He would have been retired. Forgotten, Frederick John Walker wasn't known for spectacular victories. He didn't command battleships or chase enemy cruisers. He chose something almost nobody wanted: anti-submarine warfare, not glamorous work in the Royal Navy of the 1920s and 30s. Walker spent nearly 20 years studying sonar, depth charges, and underwater acoustics, obsessed with a single question: what is a submarine captain thinking the moment before he escapes? By 1938, he had been passed over for promotion again and again. As Europe drifted toward war, the Navy quietly considered his retirement a remarkable mistake, dismissing one of the few officers who truly understood how submarines fought. Then Germany invaded Poland. War changed everything. Experienced escort commanders became priceless. In 1941, Walker finally received command of Stork and the 36th Escort Group. He was 45 for many, an age that marked the end of ambition. For Walker, it was the beginning of his life's work. His first great lesson came during Convoy HG-76 that December. Night after night, he watched the same pattern. A U-boat attacked, escorts rushed in, depth charges exploded, the submarine disappeared, the convoy survived. Everyone congratulated themselves. Walker couldn't. He knew the submarine hadn't been defeated. It had escaped repairing pipes, reloading torpedoes, preparing for the next convoy. One officer remembered merchant crews cheering after a U-boat was driven away. Walker simply stared at the sea, then said quietly, "If she's still alive, she'll kill again." That sentence became the foundation of everything that followed. Everyone else believed the convoy had won. Walker believed the war had just been postponed. Walker didn't believe Britain's biggest weakness was its ships. He believed it was its thinking. The Royal Navy had better sonar, better escorts, better training, yet submarines kept slipping away, because every attack followed the same predictable pattern, and every experienced German captain knew it. Picture the inside of a diving U-boat. The lights flicker. Then the unmistakable sound, ping, ping, ping. The escort has found you. Nobody panics yet. The captain knows what's coming. The escort will race directly overhead, and for one brief moment its sonar will lose contact. That tiny blind spot is his chance to survive. Hard. To port. Dive 20 feet. Then wait. Moments later, the sea explodes. Depth charges hammer the hull. Pipes burst. One German survivor later described it as waiting for the ocean to decide whether you deserved another breath. Then silence. If the submarine survived, the British thought they'd attacked successfully. In reality, they had just missed. Again, Walker hated that word. Every submarine that escaped today might sink another convoy next week. There had to be another way. Late at night, while others filed reports, Walker filled notebooks with rough sketches. He wasn't improving the tactic. He was replacing it. His solution: one escort would keep tracking the submarine with ASDIC. A second, instead of charging at full speed, would creep forward almost silently while the real killer approached from another direction. He called it Operation Plaster. History would remember it as the creeping attack. Senior officers stared at him in disbelief. One summed up the room: "You're asking a captain to attack blind." They weren't wrong. Walker wanted ships to close on an enemy they couldn't see, at barely 5 knots, against submarines armed with a torpedo built specifically to destroy them. To traditional officers, it wasn't bravery. It was madness. But Walker had noticed something no one else had: the gnat-hunted noise. The slower his ship moved, the quieter its propellers, the harder they were to hear. Germany had built a torpedo that listened for loud escorts. Walker intended to beat it with silence, an elegant idea, and a completely unproven one. Walker had solved the problem. Now he faced something harder than German submarines: the Admiralty. An idea, even a brilliant one, is worthless if nobody will risk lives proving it, and Walker was asking the Navy to abandon decades of doctrine. Throughout 1943, the real battle was fought inside briefing rooms at Western Approaches Command in Liverpool. None doubted Walker's intelligence. Many doubted his judgment. Their argument was simple: every escort sent hunting submarines was one less escort protecting convoys, and those convoys carried the soldiers, fuel, and ammunition Britain needed to survive, and the Allies would soon need for the invasion of Europe. One planning officer summed up the fear: if we lose the escorts, we lose the convoy. Walker believed that thinking was exactly why the war had dragged on so long. Driving away a U-boat wasn't victory, it was postponement. Destroy the submarine, and every convoy it might have attacked was saved forever. It sounded ruthless, but to Walker it was mercy measured over time: hundreds of sailors who'd never abandon ship into freezing water. Families who'd never receive a telegram beginning, "We regret to inform you." The officer who understood that best was Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches. Having once commanded submarines himself, Horton knew how U-boat captains thought, and he recognized that innovation always looks reckless until it works. Walker's earlier patrols had already shown his methods destroyed submarines. Conventional attacks failed to finish. Finally, Horton made the decision that would change the Atlantic. Walker would receive command of the 2nd Support Group 6 Black Swan-class sloops, led by his flagship, Starling. Unlike ordinary escort groups, they wouldn't babysit convoys. Their only mission was to hunt. Germany believed its new torpedo had made the Atlantic safe again. Walker was about to test whether one idea could sink an entire illusion. And beneath the winter Atlantic, 6 German captains were already sailing toward history without knowing it. If you're enjoying this story, stick around. Walker's greatest victory is about to unfold, one submarine at a time. Everything Walker had spent 20 years preparing for was about to be tested not in a classroom, but against the most feared submarine force on Earth. If Germany's new torpedo truly made U-boats untouchable, Walker's ships wouldn't be coming home. January 31st, 1944, the sonar contact was still there. Weak, moving slowly. On the bridge of Starling, no shouting, Walker simply watched, then gave instructions his crews had rehearsed countless times. The ships separated. One held ASDIC contact. The other crept forward, almost silent. Inside U-592, Captain Karl Jaschke listened. No racing propellers, no escort charging overhead. His sailors relaxed, slightly. One young mechanic later recalled that silence before an attack was often more frightening than the explosions themselves. Silence usually meant the enemy had lost you. This time it meant the enemy had found a new way to hunt. Without warning, the Atlantic erupted. Depth charges detonated with terrifying precision. The lights failed. A diesel pipe burst. The boat plunged, recovered. Then another pattern exploded closer, more accurate. Jaschke understood the truth before anyone said it aloud. They weren't escaping someone above, knew exactly where they were. Moments later, U-592 burst through the surface, only to meet gunfire. Within minutes, the Atlantic swallowed her. 46 German submariners disappeared with her for Germany. The first crack in the illusion that its new weapon had made submarines safe again. Walker said almost nothing. He turned his ships back toward the empty ocean. The hunt had only begun. For nearly a week, the Atlantic offered nothing: gray skies, heavy seas, false contacts. One sonar operator later admitted that after days on headphones, every whale, every current began to sound like a submarine. Fatigue became another enemy. Walker never allowed it to become an excuse. February 8th, the headphones came alive again. Another U-boat U-762, Woodpecker, moved into position. Again, the escorts trusted silence over speed. 22 depth charges rolled into the sea. Seconds later, oil spread across the water. Then nothing. Walker radioed Woodpecker's captain, "Come over here and look at the mess you have made." Dry, calm, but everyone in the fleet understood another experienced U-boat crew would never attack a convoy again. The Germans still believed it was bad luck. The next 24 hours proved it wasn't. February 9th. Before sunrise, another submarine. By nightfall, 2 more U-238, then U-734. Within 15 hours, Walker's group repeated the same result twice. Inside those submarines, crews waited for the familiar ASDIC pings that usually warned of an attack. They never heard them. The Nat torpedoes stayed ready in their tubes, ready, but useless. Walker hadn't beaten Germany's newest weapon with a better weapon. He had beaten it with understanding. Word was spreading through the Kriegsmarine. Something had changed. 2 days later, Walker struck again. February 11th. Wild Goose and Woodpecker hunted U-424 for hours. No dramatic chase, only relentless pressure. Every escape route disappeared. Finally, another deep explosion, another widening oil slick. The 5th submarine was gone. One exhausted sailor watching the slick drift whispered, "That's another convoy that gets home." Then the patrol's final chapter. February 19th, 19 days after the first sinking, HMS Starling and Woodpecker cornered U-264. Again the silent approach, the perfect coordination, the depth charges exploding exactly where escape should have been possible. When the sea settled, U-264 was gone, the 6th submarine. The 6th proof that Germany's greatest hope had failed. During those 19 days, Allied forces destroyed 11 U-boats across the Atlantic. Walker's second support group accounted for 6, more than half. At the same time, 12 major Atlantic convoys crossed safely without a single successful attack. That wasn't luck. It was the direct result of removing experienced crews before they ever reached their targets. The Atlantic had become safer not because Britain built a bigger fleet, but because one overlooked officer had changed the way a fleet fought. Yet Walker never considered those 19 days his greatest achievement, because while Britain celebrated 6 sinkings, his own body was already losing a battle no amount of brilliance could win. When Walker's ships returned to Liverpool, there were no victory parades. Most saw only 6 submarines destroyed. Walker saw 6 future attacks that would never happen. Imagine a Liberty ship leaving New York, its hold packed with tanks, aircraft engines, letters from home. Young American soldiers leaned against the rail, watching the Statue of Liberty disappear into the fog, unaware that 6 German submarines were no longer waiting beneath the Atlantic. Someone had already found them first. That was Walker's victory. Not the submarines he destroyed, but the lives that never had to be sacrificed because of it. The same realization spread through the Kriegsmarine. Experienced submarine crews were disappearing faster than they could be replaced, years of knowledge and instinct vanishing beneath the Atlantic. New crews couldn't replace veterans who had learned to survive dozens of patrols. The U-boat arm had begun losing something no shipyard could rebuild: experience, confidence, faith. The Nat torpedo that had promised to restore Germany's dominance had failed to stop one determined hunter. Instead of forcing Allied escorts away, it had forced Walker to invent a better way to fight. Germany had unintentionally inspired the tactic that helped defeat its own submarines. Walker's success transformed anti-submarine warfare almost overnight. His creeping attack became the model every escort commander wanted to learn. Support groups became one of Britain's most effective weapons, and convoys crossed with growing confidence, carrying the food, troops, fuel, and tanks, preparing for one operation that would change the war forever. D-Day. When Allied soldiers stormed Normandy on June 6, 1944, they did so because the Atlantic supply line had survived. Walker and his support group formed part of the shield, protecting that invasion fleet the officer once considered ready for retirement, now helping defend the largest amphibious operation in history. But while Britain celebrated victory after victory, Walker was quietly losing a battle no enemy could see. Months of relentless patrols had become years. He slept only a few hours a night and rarely left the bridge. One sailor remembered finding him asleep in a chair, still in his seacoat, only to watch him wake and immediately ask for the latest sonar reports. That was the man they followed, not because he demanded loyalty, but because he earned it. On July 9, 1944, only 5 months after the patrol that destroyed 6 U-boats in 19 days, Captain Frederick "Johnny Walker" died. He was 48. He wasn't killed by a torpedo or lost in battle. Years of exhaustion and the unbearable weight of responsibility had finally overwhelmed his body. The man who had spent years protecting thousands of lives had quietly sacrificed his own. Today, history remembers battleships, admirals, famous naval battles. But somewhere beneath the Atlantic, resting in complete darkness, lie 6 submarines that tell a different story, a reminder that wars aren't always won by the biggest guns or the newest technology. Sometimes they're won by the one person willing to question what everyone else accepts as impossible. Germany believed its torpedo had made U-boats untouchable. Walker never tried to build a bigger weapon. He simply learned to think better than his enemy. In just 19 days, one overlooked captain proved that the most dangerous weapon in war has never been a torpedo. It's an idea placed in the hands of someone courageous enough to trust it. If this story surprised you, you'll want to watch the next documentary in this series, because some of the greatest victories of the Second World War were won by people history almost forgot.